Hello, welcome to the discussion of the document number 5 in the PRI of the March 2022 APC. So the email is from Jerry. Remember, we've been introduced to Jerry as the CFO, as the CEO of Limpros. And he's sending the email to us and CCing our CFO. And the subject, property development venture. So very interesting. And I think what then came to me in terms of just seeing then this property development venture, I then recalled in the context that they had told us that they don't have any boarding facilities. And I'm thinking that when you talk about property, it might be related to that. Otherwise, I then thought that it could be something related to the building of the campuses, to say that maybe they want to look at a different strategy around building campuses, because one can argue that I'm not in the business of building and owning campuses, and it might be ideal to then enter into a venture where someone will then develop, construct, maintain, and so on and so on. So I was quite intrigued with this particular subject. Then to get into it, the email goes, "Hi there. I see Susan has sent you our corporate profile, which outlines our current operation, strategic focus. If you have any questions in relation to our strategy, please feel free to reach out to me." So he is highlighting current operations and strategic focus. And I'll then have quickly to say that, is there anything that maybe is noteworthy? So strategic, we are told that these are some of which strategy. So our current operations, this is the information here. And there was also, in terms of what, there was also a slide on our strategy. Here it is. So now he's highlighting and maybe saying to us, let's keep those things into context. So I'll then want you to go back to those slides and say, is there anything that you want to bring into focus? So let's go, however, because I'm trusting that you will do so that you can really see the context. As you know, Limpros has a tertiary division in addition to the schools division, which grew from 10 to 11 campuses in 2021. And this is what we saw. At present, our tertiary division does not offer any boarding facility, which is also part of our current operations. And therefore, students have historically been required to source their own accommodation. All right. So, makes sense. Strategically, the board contends that Limpros stands to gain a competitive advantage if it were able to provide quality, purpose-built student accommodation, in short, PBSA, to the students. So there is a strategic consideration here, which is establishing or securing a competitive advantage. The provision of PBSA is a challenge, as Limpros has historically focused on growing its educational offerings and has no experience in the development and management of these facilities. So that is something that we note that, okay, if we are to consider or be mindful, we are noting that what there's no that Limpros has no experience and probably skills to develop and manage the facilities. Okay, we note it because we should not be tempted later on when maybe a proposal is on the table and we are now choosing between whether we should do it ourselves or appoint someone to do it. We should always be mindful of this context, because this, one will wonder, why is it relevant? It could be relevant because if I don't have experience, I could take much longer. I could incur excessive cost to someone who has what? Who has experience. And I could build something of poor quality, which could have an impact on what? On our reputation. For instance, I build something and next thing I hear that a wall has fallen on a candidate or something like that. So these are the risks of venturing into a project without the experience, because one will then wonder, why are you telling me that they don't have experience? Because I could just do it. So the risk here will have then to be what? To be balanced off. Then at our last board meeting, the board resolved that Limpros should approach strategic partners. So it's very interesting what they're suggesting. I was thinking that they will be considering appointing a developer, but they have gone an additional step, and they are what? But they are looking for a partner. Now, one will wonder, why a partner and not just someone to come and develop and go? So now let's read, because that was one of the things, because the model then being chosen here was quite specific. And one will then say, let me just go and look at existing model. Does the likes of Curo do something like this? Is this something that is standard? What are the benefits of having a partner versus a supplier who's just a developer and leave? So let's read further. With experience in PBSA, with the aim of opening its first PBSA facility for students at the start of the 2023 academic year. So this was then very interesting. They want to have this ready by next year. But one of the things that I was a little bit concerned with is that, or maybe not concerned, but to note rather, is that they seem to have been focusing on experience, but choosing a partner requires more than just the experience. There are partners out there that have got good experience, but their integrity might be questionable. So I will then say, Limpros, maybe you need to be specific or maybe much broader than just looking for experience. Do you have the integrity? Do you have a good reputation? So remember, experience could be, I've done this before. But I could have been doing it and I could have just been disappointing one customer after another. So it's one thing to have experience and it's another to have a good reputation. And it's one thing to have what? To have experience, and it's another to have integrity. In other words, am I reliable? Do I finish things on time? Do I treat my customer in a professional and just manner? So those are the things that maybe before we just think, because this is a partner. This is not just a developer who will do and leave. This is someone that you're going to be with for probably an extended period of time. Okay. Then they say, I've had a number of fruitful conversations with a well-known developer. Okay, so now from a reputation perspective, they are now easing me in. They're well-known, and I'm thinking if they are well-known, they might be well-known for good things or for bad things. So I'm still keeping an open mind with regards to the choice of this partner. And additionally, maybe before we go, another partner consideration is also their financial strength. Because you don't want a partner that is probably over-indebted, such that, because sometimes when someone is over-indebted, they might be paid money and use it for something else. Or they might not be able to finish projects because they don't have access to money, and resulting in just delays. So if you tell me that this is the partner I'm going to work with, I'll want to know their integrity, their reputation, as well as their financial strength, in addition to their experience. Then this partner is called Varsity Point, and they're based in Pretoria. They have successfully developed in excess of 15 PBSA across South Africa. Now I'm wondering, is 15 a good number? How many universities are there in South Africa? How many colleges are there in South Africa that might have PBSA? And I'm thinking about just say the likes of UCT. UCT had a number of residential accommodation or student accommodation. Just on campus, I believe there were 2, and then offsite campus, just lower campus, there were about 3 or 4, and in the other side of town, there were a couple more, and so on. So I'm thinking that if just the likes of UCT has got about, say, 6 to 8 or even around 10, then, and there are maybe, say, 20 universities in South Africa, and maybe each of them has got an average of 5. So that's about 100. So 15, it's not bad. So I'm thinking that maybe that's where they are coming from. 15 is not bad. For someone to trust them with 15, that could be a very good start. But I wonder on how we then got to select them. Were there no other prospective partners? How did we then just stumble to have these fruitful conversations with this with Limpros, or with Varsity College, right? With Varsity Point, I mean, sorry. So I wonder, how did they get to select this? And that's where the 15 was. I questioned it from that perspective, to just say, why 15? Is it saying that maybe it's the highest, is the market saturated, and so on? So I'm just trying to be mindful, because if I'm sitting as part of the board and you present a partner, I'll want to know that this partner is clean, that you're not doing a favor for your friend, and this is someone who knows what they're doing, and so on and so on. So that is where I am coming from. Then Varsity Point manages its portfolio. Varsity manages its portfolio internally and has grown from strength to strength. All right, it seems that they know what they are doing, which is quite encouraging. So they manage their portfolio internally. And it seems now, from what I'm reading, that there are 2 things here, and it seems to be quite intentional. There's the development where the structure sits, but then there seems to be also a management leg. And we are looking for a partner that seemingly will be able to do both. We are interested in the fact that they are well known, and also in the fact that in the fact that they do this internally. So they have the expertise to do so. So very interesting. But at this point, I also wonder, wonder if they will have the capacity to develop the number that I'm interested in, that Limpros might be interested in. Okay, what do I mean? So I mean that if you think about this, so they've got 15, we've got 11 campuses. We have not been told about the location of these. It could essentially be that maybe there are 3 in Gauteng, and there may be this 1 in Durban, and so on and so on. Will then they have the capacity and the resources to be able to develop on a national basis, and also support them on a regular basis? And this is what I'm just thinking, that they've got 15 already. And if we've got 11, it's almost doubling of their capacity. That could be significant. Yes, they could say, yes, the 15 are dispersed across the country, but I'm saying that, but do you recognize that this will be almost of a doubling? And the question is, what is our timeline? Is it just 1? If it's not 1, that's not bad for just next year. But if we plan to do more, that could be a bit tricky. But I need to therefore understand them better, to just say, oh, Limpros or Varsity Point, what is your capacity? You have the resources to be able to add more to your existing portfolio, since you manage this internally. Then Limpros and Varsity Point have agreed to enter into a strategic partnership, in terms of which Varsity Point will develop and manage a new portfolio of PBSA facilities. So now I'm thinking that, hold on. At this point, I was not clear. It sounded like maybe a strategic question because they're telling me they want to expand, and maybe I'm thinking that if they are to expand, there could be capital contributions that we need to talk about, and so on and so on. And the other consideration that I've already asked in this particular regard. But now they are introducing a strategic relationship or partnership, and they're talking about that what it is going to do. Now I'm saying, hold on, now you look like IFRS 11. Could this be embedded a technical trigger, an accounting technical trigger? Why do I say this? Because this could possibly be an IFRS 11 kind of setup, or maybe an IFRS 10 kind of setup. When now we are saying what? When now we are saying that this strategic relationship between Limpros and Varsity Point could need to be assessed on whether what? On whether it will be a joint arrangement or a subsidiary of Limpros. So that is what I'm thinking about. And the reason why I'm there is because they told us that it's going to develop and manage. And this looks like relevant activities. So I'm saying that I'm in the money now. Like Psycha, whatever you're going to throw at me, you're going to find me ready. This will cater specifically for Limpros existing and prospective tertiary education. And I'm saying, hold on, that even more sounds like what is then the purpose of this joint arrangement? And is it created to benefit one of the parties? And I was thinking that those are the thinking of a joint arrangement requirements in terms of IFRS 11. So now my mind is now all over the show with IFRS 11. And I'm just thinking that there might be a situation where there could be economic dependence. And this will be talking to other facts and circumstances of what? Of IFRS 11 assessment of whether it's a joint arrangement, it's a joint venture, or a joint operation. Varsity Point will be commencing with the development of the first facility. So that question about capacity to handle our volume as we grow, it is a relevant one because there is a suggestion that there will be a first facility, meaning that others are possibly coming. And I'm thinking that additionally, what could be a benefit here with this partnership? Maybe let's go further, because I now have another thinking as to why there will be a partnership, or a partnership could be ideal. The development is anticipated to be completed by 31 December. So what if it's not completed by then? What if there's a delay? Why am I saying this? Because if you think about how Varsity works, when I apply, I will apply now and they'll ask me, do you want accommodation? And I'll tick yes or I'll tick no. And the idea is that immediately after, or when I leave home, I'm expecting to go directly into that accommodation where I've been accepted. So now if we are cutting it short, such that we are talking about what? 31 December. And the academic year will then just be starting a day later, or 2 days later, if we think about the fact that the first is a holiday. But I'm thinking that that's cutting it short. And there are risks with what? With regards to delays. So there are risks with regards to delays. And what? And there are risks with regards to the delays. And when it comes to those, it means that this might not be a successful venture. Why? Because as a parent, or maybe even as a student, when I'm going into, say, a new place and I don't have family and relatives there, I might want to secure a place before I even go, which might mean I enter into a long-term lease, which is likely a year. And if I am not sure whether this thing will be ready on time, I could then end up taking an alternative to this development that is at play. And if then that is the case, what it will mean what? What it will mean, what it will then mean, it will mean that we will have a situation where we are losing candidates and we could end up with this facility being empty. And we also wonder that this idea of developing the PBSA at a sensitive time, such as that of COVID-19, will there be full resumption of face-to-face sessions? Because this will affect our demand. So there is risks of delays, which could result in candidates taking alternative accommodation arrangement. That's the risk number one. And also we are thinking about that the ability to fill the capacity will depend on whether face-to-face classes will be resuming at full force. If they will not be resuming at full force, then this might not be This might not be a good idea. And as such, we'll be able to accept students for the 2023 academic year. And now let's say that maybe Limpros is very confident with Varsity Point, and they start taking candidates in, and then there are delays. Do you agree that delays after confirming the reservation could result in reputational damage? Because I'm thinking here that I'm applying and I'm told that we have accommodation, and they might be banking that, oh wait, this thing will then be ready, say by end of Jan, or in this case, end of December. And I'm thinking, let's say the academic year is starting in Jan, because one will probably want to be there before, or not just simply on the first day that the school is opening. And if then that's the case, now I'm thinking that I then confirm, I don't look for alternative arrangement, and come Jan, this place is not complete, meaning that it might result in the late start of the academic year. It might also just result in unhappy candidates and so on. So that could have a reputational damage. So it is very important. It is very important that we are mindful of what? That we are mindful of this kind of consideration before we jump in. I have summarized the strategic partnership with Varsity Point, still to be finalized. Investment vehicle, and I'm thinking in terms of IFRS 11, there is a separate vehicle. There is a separate vehicle. So I'm thinking that there is no way that this will not be an accounting issue. I am so much convinced. So, but I'm just now surprised that, is it going to be strategy mixed with accounting, or they're going to have two tasks in here? I was like, very interesting. Let's see where they'll take it. Then they then told us that Limpros will own 40% and Varsity Point will own 60%. So now it sounds like, my initial thinking might have been wrong. But before I say it's wrong, I might want to understand, how are decisions made? How are decisions regarding or relating to the relevant activities made? Because that could still be a joint arrangement if decisions require unanimous consent. Otherwise, it will be what? An associate. If unanimous consent required, then this is definitely what? A joint arrangement. If not, then this will then be what? An associate. And then the next consideration will then be the next consideration will be that varsity point is in the point of analyzing a development facility in respect of the PBSA to be constructed in Pretoria. So the process of finalizing a development feasibility study. So what is a feasibility study? Because now it will help me to understand the trigger. What is a feasibility? Is that a contract? How does then this contract look like? If it's a study, what is it studying? And what kind of input will I expect? Will I be surprised if they give me an extract of that feasibility study and ask me to analyze it? Will I be surprised if they have done some calculation in the feasibility study and I'm supposed to review? So what is a feasibility study? So I will then head to what? I then had to consult Google and say, Google, tell me more about what is a feasibility study. And then Google said, no, this is something that considers the natural environment and whether something, whether the proposed project is feasible. I was like, feasible how? And they clarify it's a matter of comparing cost and value. Oh, when I saw cost and value, then ring, I'm thinking that there's going to be a financial evaluation. There's going to be a financial evaluation. Because had I not done that, it would have been very difficult for me to pick up that a feasibility study contains details about the cost and the value. Because sometimes I hear when they talk about a feasibility study, say, for building a mall. And I was just saying that maybe they're just looking at whether a mall will be able to fit here, whether the environment, whether the area might be zoned, and also whether there are people that will be coming and where they're coming from. But I didn't know that there will be this kind of detail of cost versus value. And now having Googled that, I'm in a better state to anticipate a task. So a feasibility study could then come up with a budget. It could come up with a budget and possibly a financing plan. So they could possibly what? They could possibly be a financing plan to say that if this thing makes sense and we are going for it, how will it be financed? How will it be financed? So that is something that what? That is something that I will then be mindful of. Then we noted that we are looking forward to what? To a feasibility study. Then we expect to receive this within a few days. Varsity Point has indicated that it has identified an existing commercial building which it feels will be suitable for the conversion. So now I'm now thinking about what? I'm now thinking about the cost commitment. So cost commitment. So the cost commitment will what? Will involve. So the cost commitment will involve the what? Will involve the purchasing. So will involve the purchasing. So the purchasing cost involvement will involve the purchase. Sorry. And therefore, consideration of cost and the funding of those costs will then be what? Will then be necessary to consider. And funding of those costs. So one will then expect that since it's a what? It's a 40-60 arrangement, we need to come with what? 40% of the capital. And therefore, it is the capital to acquire the what? The building, and the capital to convert the building. So how much is it, and do we have it? And maybe that's where now we start going back to the context and say that let's see what we've got. And when we go back to the context, we realize that we have a bit of cash, about 55 million. So that's decent. We have about 55 million worth of costs. And then additionally, we look at the balance sheet to ask, do we have the capacity to raise more debt? To raise debt from what we have got. We've got a debt of 200 million, which is a lot. And the equity, however, it's quite more. So in terms of the capacity to raise debt, the capacity to raise debt, it's there. So I should not just be generic with the examiners, where I just say we need to consider funding. I have the context. So context is saying cash is 55 million. And furthermore, context is saying that what? There is debt capacity because long-term loan, it's only 250 million, of which 50 it's payable next year. And equity, it's about 714 million. Let's say 715 million. And if you think about this, this will then be amounting to what? To 250 over 715. So just about 35% debt ratio. So there seems to be what? A capacity. But we need to be mindful of what is the target ratio, as well as the target ratio that the board will desire. And maybe where are other schools? Because this could what? This could other competing schools. So other competing schools. So the other competing schools will then highlight the other competing schools might highlight that, oh, maybe there is not supposed to be a lot of debt in this kind of schools. Because if we check also from a context perspective, the company had about 65 million last year, and now it's sitting with 55 million. So that means there is a downward trend in terms of what? In terms of just the cash usage. And if there's a downward trend with regards to the debt usage and the cash usage, one will then say, what do you therefore need to be safe? Because you don't want to then spend, say, 50 million or 30 million. And so these are just some of the considerations that I'm being mindful of, to just say, when it comes to the funding, I'll want to have contextualized this. Because if someone just says that this project will require 30 million and someone says there's enough cash, what one will then want to say, but is that really enough given the operations of this particular business? And also taking into account that there will just be this particular capital, and will there be enough capital to say sustain the development in its first year? Maybe more capital will be required in the form of working capital, and we need to be well prepared. So that's my consideration. And before I leave the issue of cost and value, I'm thinking that this is a long-term project. So if it's a long-term project, then it might need to be assessed using one of the long-term, one of the generally accepted techniques, such as what? Such as NPV. So now, will there be an NPV? Now this task is starting to be, or this document is starting to be very loaded. And I'm wondering whether there are three triggers here. The one for maybe discussion of strategic consideration with regards to this. And number two, the evaluation of, say, the budgets included in the feasibility study. And number three, the evaluation of the nature of the relationship that we've got, or we are about to have, with Varsity Point. So a very loaded email. So the kind of work that we need to do will need to be clear and intentional, so that we are not caught off guard on the day. I will need your assistance in reviewing and analyzing the proposal. So the proposal will include the structure. The proposal might include the financing proposal. That means in the trigger here, I need to just probably revise my knowledge on sources of what? Sources of capital. Then when it comes to what? When it comes to then the value and the cost, I'm thinking NPV. And as part of that, it might be just, does this make sense from a strategic consideration? We need to submit it, we'll need to submit it to the board for approval should we opt to participate in the development. Then I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity, and I look forward to receiving your insights. Please keep an eye on your emails during the coming days, Jerry. So that is it. That is what we have here. We've got a lot to think about, and we've got a lot to start doing ahead of the day. All right, so to continue from there, it's now a matter of what? It's now a matter of saying that now I've got what I've got. Oh, I think I'm not sharing my other screen. Let me quickly do that. Yes. So I'm here. So now I'm saying that now with what we've got, it's a matter of what do we do with it? We've got questions that are lying around. And now the question is, what is the additional work to do? So this is then the template that we normally use in terms of just structuring the expected kind of work. So the first thing here is to do what? The first thing here is to talk about the first trigger, which I said related to accounting. So the action will be for me to revise the principle of assessing whether an arrangement is a joint operation or not. And also undertake preliminary analysis to what? To determine the classification of that joint arrangement, or rather the nature of the arrangement. And this is now where we ask questions such as, so I've just amended the wording slightly. So as I was saying, that I want to then revise the principles of IFRS 11 so that I understand how to assess whether an arrangement is a joint arrangement or not. And what is always important about a trigger is the work that you do. Because sometimes the problem is that I find that candidates only do just the revising of the technical work, but you have to just apply some of the technical work to the information that is given. And therefore, one will then say that as we were doing, what are then the factors to consider in reaching to the conclusion that we will want to reach, say, on the day. And therefore, I will then challenge you to start assessing whether there is unanimous consent, what are the considerations with regards to the structure? Are there any terms and conditions now or that may be clarified later that will help in terms of clarifying that question? And what are the other facts and circumstances, which a lot of this we've already started doing. It is just, for me, it's important to start doing that preliminary work. Don't go blind into the assessment and just hope that you'll figure it out then. So in terms of then what am I expecting the assessors to do? I'm saying that one, I'm expecting that they might ask me whether the arrangement is a joint arrangement, and if so, what is the classification of that arrangement? Or I can find that after receiving the feasibility study, maybe a Susan has already gone and done the preliminary analysis of the nature of that arrangement, and she might just want me to cast an eye on it. Remember that she has been CC'd on the email, so she might be thinking about the accounting considerations. Then, what is also going to be important was then the second trigger. That Varsity Point is in the process of finalizing a development feasibility study. and you will need your assistance with reviewing. And when I then looked at this, I then wore the 6 capital framework that we discussed. And I was saying that, are there any factors that I'll need to be mindful of from a financial capital perspective? And it was, for me, the funding of the initial investment, as I've already shared with you. The additional income to be earned will enhance our financial capital. So those were some of the considerations that I was mindful of. And then I was also mindful of the manufactured capital, that there's going to be a purpose-built accommodation, and therefore it will meet the needs of our candidates, and it is likely to experience or achieve higher utilization because it is for a particular purpose and it meets that purpose. And what I'm also mindful of is that it could enhance the value of our existing business model as well as our properties. Because now if there's a campus and an accommodation, that as a package might be might attract a higher fair value. Then social capital, I'm sure you might have seen a lot of universities have students have expressed frustration about student accommodation, the difficulty thereof, and the expectation for them to sort it out on their own. So here, Limpros is really solving a real need. And by doing so, it could enhance its social and relationship capital. They could be, say, other stakeholders that might be interested in seeing this being a success. So those could be some of those kind of consideration. Intellectual capital, the brand of Limpros could be enhanced by investing in a purpose-built accommodation such as this. So that could be something to consider. And also we need to be mindful around whether Varsity Point's reputation, it's of top-notch. Because if it's of top-notch, maybe they are known to build something of low quality that really undermines the quality of life for the candidates. Now you're partnering with them and you're announcing this. It might taint your reputation to say, oh, you really don't care about the students. It's about making money. We know Varsity Point. We know them very well. And this is how they operate. So one will need to be, when they're thinking about intellectual or social capital, just those partnership consideration with Varsity Point. And lastly, from a human capital perspective, since this might require a new division to be established to manage maybe the relationship between us and Varsity College, as well as to be able to advertise this properly to the candidates, as well as package it into the fee structure, that might mean that we need additional resources in order to achieve that. And those additional resources may come in the form of of people, human capital. So do you see, as I was saying, that firstly I read the IOD line, the PRI line by line, but before I moved, I then contextualized things, and I'm contextualizing things in the space of using rather the 6 capitals model. Now, what do I expect? What I'm expecting is to discuss and outline factors that the board needs to consider prior to investing. Or that feasibility study, which I would have loved to see. That feasibility study could have maybe outlined some of the key consideration, and you might have been required to analyze whether they are complete, whether they present significant risk to the company, and so on. It will have been a very interesting one and a very dynamic and creative question on the part of the assessors. But I'm just saying that I would have been mindful that this feasibility study, from what I understand, is supposed to be a thorough document. And in terms of other consideration, I'm thinking it will have already included those. Maybe I just need to cast my eye and be clear as to the impact on Limpros. Then lastly, I anticipated an NPV. as well as source of financing consideration. So I will then send, please revise your source of financing theory as to what to consider, maybe the interest rates, especially now that the interest rates is on an upward trend. Maybe consider the nature of the loan. Is it a variable interest, a fixed interest loan? Consider the term of the loan to make sure it matches the project, and those kind of things to match the cash flows of this investment. So those are some of the things that I'll just want to be mindful of. Then the big trigger then for me was the NPV. And what I always see is that candidates will say NPV is there and they leave it there, or they just download the CTA slides and have them alongside. But I require you to do more. Think about what that financial forecast in the feasibility study would look like. That from a revenue side, there might be two of them that needs to be done if you think about it. It might be one that Limpros will need to do on its own, and it might be one that Varsity Point and Limpros investment vehicle will need to do. Why am I saying that? Because the one for Limpros and Varsity Point will include only the cash flows from the accommodation. Now that there is accommodation, maybe other candidates will say, oh, this is an institution that I will now consider. Do you see that? And therefore, there could be additional income coming into Limpros because they now have this PBSA. So that is something that I'll want you to consider in terms of just the revenue addition. A revenue consideration. So thinking about Limpros Varsity College modeling, it will be the number of candidates as well as what? As well as the fees. Because now when we talk about the number of candidates, I'm trying to think about it to take it to what? To occupancy. Because now if we say that this is a 200 candidate capacity, but the institution is doing just 180, then I will want there to be some kind of relationship. And in some cases, it could be that this is a 200 capacity PBSA, but then the institution is 1,000. But I'll also need to just consider whether all the candidates will want to move here. So those are the kind of things that I will be mindful of when I'm thinking about the number of candidates that will be occupying this. And also to think about that, it will be a matter of accommodation fees. How much are we going to charge these candidates? So the economy is tough now. This is a new facility, and you might be expecting to charge more, and there could be cheaper alternatives. How does that look like? So these are then the considerations where we will need to just be mindful of from a revenue perspective. Then from a cost side, I'm thinking that I'll want to understand if the candidates will then be getting meals and the cost of those meals. Security staff, so security is an important part of what? It's an important part of a new accommodation. We've had horror stories in some of this student accommodation. So you will want to invest in proper security. Utilities, electricity keeps going up, water is scarce, and you want to make sure that it's also well managed. Maintenance of the facilities as well as admin support. So those are some of the additional or incremental cash flows that I'll expect related to this PBSA. Then investment is the cost of the building, renovation, as well as the beds and the equipment like the table, chairs, and so on and so on. But related to that will be to think about the residual value. So this is how I want you to do it. Be specific with regards to what you're looking at. Don't just leave it there and say, oh, I'm looking for revenue and so on. Think in a context. Remember the issue of thinking in a context, we said we can never overemphasize this. It's very, very important. Working capital, don't be generic with working capital. Think about whether the candidates will be paying in advance, or will they be paying on a monthly basis, or whether they will then be entering into bursary arrangement with the firms, and then the bursary arrangements will say once registration is closed around March, that's when we'll make payments. Those can affect your working capital considerations. And your suppliers, how are you going to pay for their services? Is it on a cash basis, or is it also on a delay basis? That could have an impact on your working capital. Tax implications, we are thinking that this acquisition constitutes what? An acquisition of a non-manufacturing building. Allowances, I understand that Section 13 Queen is applicable for new and unused building, but this one, they said that there is an existing one. Will you be able to get allowances? Revise your tax. And also, what about the renovations that you will make? Will you qualify for those improvements to be deducted immediately, or to be deducted using other provisions of the Income Tax Act? What about the equipment that's there and the residual value implication? Because unlike, say, equipment, machinery, the value of a building shoots up. So there could be CGT implication. So have you thought about that? The discount rate to use, will you use Limpros or Varsity College's discount rate? Sorry, Varsity Point's discount rate? Will the funding structure that will be proposed have an impact on the discount rate? And also, how do you then factor in the specific risk? Because if you just use Varsity Point has got a portfolio across different industry. But what about the specific risks, say, in this particular campus in Pretoria? And other what consideration, because it could be that a campus in Pretoria, it's at a high risk because there are a lot of alternative accommodation in the area, say compared to the likes of Cape Town, which they might be there, but they might be more expensive than, say, student accommodation. So those are some of the things that when deciding on the discount rate, I need to be mindful of. Then other consideration is what will then be the escalation of some of the cost and revenues that you will have included. The enrollment figures, we've already spoken about them, as well as the allocation of income, to say that, remember that this is not all our income. Some belongs to Varsity Point and some belong to us. So this could be some of those considerations. So the task here for me that I'm expecting, it's one where I will need to review the financial forecast included in the feasibility study. So that is where, and the kind of work, that is where I am, and the kind of work that I will need to do before the pre-released information, before the assessment day. Sorry about that, but thank you and all the best with yours.